Have you ever listened to a kid, maybe a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old kid, tell a story that they're really excited about? If you'll ask them a story about when they go to Disneyland or they do something that they're really excited about and they keep adding more to the story, they'll usually say, and then we did this, and then we did that, and then we did this other thing. They get really excited the more they talk. And when you listen to them, you know, your eyebrows kind of raise because they get more excited. It sounds like it's going somewhere. The story keeps getting better and better. It's leading to a big conclusion. And what they're doing when you listen to them, you know that they're doing what's called a progression. They start at one point, and then we did something else, and then we did that. And it's leading up and it's getting higher and their voice pitch gets higher and they get more excited and animated. The more they talk, it keeps getting higher and they keep saying things like, and then we did this. This is called a progression, and it's often used in Scripture to move a story or to move a reasoning toward a climax of an argument, to lead it toward the main point, to take what was beginning with the point that was made and then re-emphasize it and move it toward a new climax. And a progression is a very simple thing. We do it all the time. So let's look at what a progression is and how it's used in Scripture. If we're going to use a progression, the sign we're going to use for that is a P. We're just going to write a P for progression. So what is a progression? We talked about it just a second ago, but let's give a formal definition. A progression moves the idea further along. Each proposition is a further step toward a climax in the argument. So here are the key words that you're going to be looking for or be aware of when we look for progressions. You're going to look for the words then, and, moreover, and furthermore. Now you're going to notice that and was also in a series. Some of these words can double up. Like and can be used in a series or a progression. So if we want to use this in a real life example, where's an example in Scripture that we can point to that uses a progression? We can look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 3 through 8. Now, I'm not going to write that whole scripture out for you where you can see it on your screen, but in Matthew 3 through 8, Jesus is giving the signs of his return, the signs of the end of the age, as they call it. And Jesus is talking about this, and he gets down to the end where he says, and these are the beginning of what Jesus calls birth pains for his return. And you think that when he says, you know, this is the beginning of birth pains, and he puts the period on it, that's the end. But then Jesus, see how I used a progression there, and then Jesus says, then they will do other things. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation. It starts in verse 9, where the progression starts. So you think Jesus is ending it where he says, these are the beginning of birth pains, puts a period there. Then he progresses the argument further and shows what's going to happen to believers at the end of the age. So if you want to look at verse 9, we'll kind of go through that and map it out a little bit. Here's the scripture just in its raw form. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my sake. So if we want to map this scripture out and see what it looks like, we right justify it against the screen, divide it into prepositions. We see keywords. We see then, so that's one. And then we see and, like we talked about in our last session. So that's a series. So we're going to start right there. We're going to split it there. Then they will deliver you up and put you to death. There's another and you will be hated by all nations. Another preposition, for my sake. So here's how it works. The first thing we notice is right there in the middle. And put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations. So that's a series. It's furthering the argument about what they will do when they would deliver you to tribulation. It's not just tribulation, but he continues on about what they will do. They'll not only deliver you to tribulation, but they will also put you to death, and you will be hated. So tribulation, death, and hatred are all right there in that description. So, and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations. That's a series. So what's the progression? We see the word then, so we know that Jesus is furthering the argument. So we bracket, then they will deliver you to tribulation, to the series that we see underneath it. The argument is progressing from they will deliver you to tribulation. It's progressing into and put you to death and will be hated by all nations. So all three of those prepositions are now connected. So we see the dangling for my sake that's hanging down there. We haven't got to it yet, but ground and purpose, this is the reason for what came before it. So for my sake is going to be connected with a ground and purpose. This is the purpose, this is the reason that they will deliver you to tribulation, put you to death, and will be hated by all nations. Why will this happen? You will be hated because you're my believers, for my sake. So basically, the then in verse 9 progresses or moves forward Jesus' discussion on the signs of the end of the age that we find in verses 3 through 8. So we see all that going on. And so progressions contribute to the main idea and moves the story toward a climax. This is the point of a progression. So the next time you hear a kid talking about something they did that was fun, and then we did this, and then we did that, you know the story is moving towards something good, moving towards something wonderful. They're doing a progression, and that does the same thing in Scripture. This is just one example of a progression in Scripture. We see this constantly. So if you're mapping a Scripture out and your home Bible study or preparing a lesson, you'll know that when you see something like then and moreover, furthermore, those are indicators of something moving an argument toward a climax, progressing it forward to understand it better. We'll see you in the next session.